He didn't rise to power through family connections or quiet elections. He didn't come to office with the blessings of Paris, Washington, or multinational corporations. He arrived wearing military fatigues, backed by a promise to reclaim Burkina Faso for its people, and a warning to the foreign powers who had grown comfortable in its gold, soil, and silence.
Africa is waking up, and no one can still close the eyes of Africans on our reality. No one can still come to divide us, to impose on us what they want. That's why we have done everything to be here today to speak to you.
At just 34, Captain Ibrahim Traoré became the face of defiance in West Africa. In his first few months in power, he dismantled the traditional script, one where African leaders bowed politely to old colonial masters, welcomed Western troops onto their soil, and signed away national resources in exchange for debt, aid, or survival. Traoré did the opposite. He kicked out French forces, canceled foreign mining contracts, and announced that Burkina Faso would no longer beg. For some, it was a revolution. For others, a threat that had to be eliminated. And that's when the attempts began. Not whispers, not warnings, but actual plots. Professional, persistent, and precise. Gunmen, bombs, bribes, and betrayals, coming not just from rebel groups, but from men in suits, uniforms, and diplomatic offices. What Traoré didn't realize, or perhaps what he did, was that challenging the empire doesn't just get you criticized, it gets you hunted. There have been more attempts to end Traoré than you can count on your fingers, but this recent attempt shocked everyone. So what happened? Let's find out. First, let's take a look at the most famous coup and assassination attempts on Traoré. According to the reports, it all started in January 2023. The national pulse was beating to the rhythm of football chants. Streets were quiet, homes filled with cheers, and television screens flickered with the colors of the African Cup of Nations. On the surface, it was just another night of pride, hope, and distraction. But elsewhere, behind closed doors, in places without cameras, a much darker game was underway. Far from the stadium, a group of men had been tracking something else entirely, the movements of the head of state, not to protect him, but to erase him. The plan was meticulous, coordinated around the assumption that security would be relaxed, attention scattered, and schedules predictable. While the nation celebrated, a device had been discreetly placed in a residential compound associated with the president. It wasn't meant for intimidation. It was engineered for silence, a swift detonation that would leave behind rubble, rumors, and no room for rescue. But the plot didn't end with the bomb. There was a backup, one even colder in its calculation. Should the device fail or the timing slip, an ambush had been prepared for the very next morning. A decoy vehicle was to be sent ahead. Gunmen were planted at precise intervals along the motorcade's expected route. The idea was to force a delay, separate the convoy, and create confusion long enough for the main car, carrying Traoré, to be hit with everything from rifles to RPGs. This wasn't the work of amateurs. The tools were too clean. The execution plan was too rehearsed. The movements of the president had been monitored for weeks, possibly by people with access. People who knew when he left, when he returned, and when his guards changed shifts. The plan assumed more than just surveillance. It required cooperation, or at least silence, from someone inside the machinery of the state. But then something unexpected happened. Not from the police, not from the local army, but from abroad. A message came in, allegedly from Russia's Foreign Intelligence Service. And it wasn't vague. It was surgical. Names, coordinates, times, even the make and model of the vehicles involved. The warning arrived mere hours before the device was set to detonate. And just like that, the entire plan unraveled. The device was neutralized. The ambush team fled. And Traoré, who was never supposed to hear the explosion, was informed of a reality far more explosive. That someone, somewhere, had already begun the process of eliminating him before his reforms could even take root. This wasn't a public assassination. It wasn't meant to send a message. It was meant to end everything without a sound. But it didn't. And as intelligence officers retraced the operation, one unsettling truth became clear. This was only the beginning. Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. The failure of the football bombing didn't discourage his enemies. It simply changed their tactics. If they couldn't kill him from the outside, they would try something even more insidious. Bring him down from within. And this time, the weapon wasn't explosives. It was the ambition of men in uniform, men who once saluted him. September 2023 began like any other month in the capital. Official business moved forward. Troop rotations continued. Cabinet meetings were held. But beneath the normalcy, something was unraveling. There were whispers inside the barracks, late-night meetings disguised as briefings, and quiet phone calls that stopped abruptly when certain names were mentioned. It wasn't paranoia, it was preparation. At the heart of this second attempt were men who had once stood at the center of power. These weren't rogue officers or fringe actors. They were part of the post-coup establishment, insiders. Men who had tasted authority during previous regimes and were now watching it slip away under Traoré's rule. But what they lacked in official power, they tried to compensate for with influence, pulling favors from old networks, rekindling loyalty from discontented officers, and reaching into the gray zone between national politics and foreign interests. The operation they began to organize wasn't about causing chaos. It was about surgically replacing the president, flipping the structure of power without letting the public know until it was already done. What gave the coup its teeth wasn't just military coordination, it was its strategic timing. Just weeks prior, Traoré had doubled down on his anti-colonial rhetoric, proposed sweeping reforms to the mining sector, and moved closer to regional military alliances that excluded traditional Western partners. These moves shook the political foundations, not just in Burkina Faso, but far beyond its borders. The deeper intelligence agencies dug, the more troubling the connections became. The planned coup appeared to link back to Paul-Henri Damiba, Traoré's predecessor, a man deposed but not entirely gone. Though in exile, Damiba had reportedly been maintaining communication with figures still embedded in the security apparatus. There were even whispers that some funding had come from external sources who had everything to gain from a reversal of Traoré's policies. This plot was different from the first. It wasn't trying to destroy Traoré in a flash of violence. It was trying to erase him through the procedure. A coup that would be justified as necessary, branded as a stabilizing measure, and perhaps even applauded in some foreign capitals. But once again, it failed. The plan leaked. The conspirators were named, arrests were made, and Traoré remained in control. Yet the lesson was chilling. His enemies weren't always hiding in shadows. Sometimes they were sitting in the same room, wearing the same uniforms, speaking the same language of patriotism, while preparing to replace the revolution with a replica of the past. When coups fail and bombs don't detonate, those who crave control resort to something older than war itself, gold. Not the kind you mine from the ground, but the kind that buys silence, betrayal, and death. And recently, as the reports suggest, the people trying to remove Captain Ibrahim Traoré had already exhausted two approaches: elimination through destruction and removal through deception. Neither had worked. The president was still in office, still popular, and still untamed. That's when the strategy shifted again. This time, away from overt power grabs and toward the one place no bullet or battalion had yet reached: his inner circle. This new plan didn't involve generals or mercenaries. It involved a private jet, an unannounced arrival, and a man who didn't carry a weapon, he carried money. According to high-level security sources, the operation was quiet, almost invisible. No public meetings, no political negotiations, just a series of discreet conversations with the individuals who stood closest to the president, his bodyguards. These weren't mere security staff. These were the men who stood within meters of him at all times. They controlled access, handled emergency exits, and had unrestricted proximity to one of the most hunted leaders in Africa. In short, they were the only ones who didn't need to breach a gate to reach him. They were already on the inside. The approach was simple, but chilling. The mystery figure, whose identity remains a classified state secret, made contact with one of the guard units during a routine off-duty cycle. There was no coded language, No vague suggestion. The offer was direct. 5 million US dollars. Clean, untraceable. Delivered in physical currency. Not wired, not promised. Along with the money came something else. Specially imported ammunition, engineered to pierce armored protection and guaranteed to kill on contact. The logic was brutal. Traoré often traveled with minimal barriers between himself and his security. If one of them turned, there would be no time to react. No need for an army, just a moment of hesitation, a raised arm, and a bullet. The men were told there would be no consequences. A vehicle was arranged to extract them within minutes of the assassination. A destination abroad had already been prepared. All that was needed was a betrayal. But what happened next caught everyone, including Traoré, by surprise. Instead of executing the plan, the guards held a meeting of their own. Whether it was out of conscience, loyalty, fear, or something deeper, they made a decision that would likely save not just one man's life, but possibly a movement. They turned over the money, every note, every bullet, every piece of the plan, and they handed it directly to the president. The look on his face, insiders later said, was not shock. It was a quiet confirmation of something he already knew, that the war against him wasn't just coming from across borders or from exiled politicians. It was now crawling through his corridors, knocking on the doors of his protectors. The arrest that followed was swift, silent, and entirely off-record. The individual who offered the bribe was reportedly detained and immediately transferred into a black site facility. Not a prison, but a location used for high-value intelligence extraction. Officials refused to reveal his nationality. No public trial, no photos, no name. But in the intelligence world, the questions began piling up. Who had $5 million to casually spend on a political murder in one of Africa's poorest countries? Who had access to advanced ammunition normally restricted to special operations forces? Who had the confidence to approach elite presidential guards with a proposal this bold? No answers were given. But the silence itself spoke volumes. And yet what mattered most in that moment wasn't who sent the man. It was who refused to obey. The guards could have taken the money. They could have fled the country, changed their names, and disappeared into luxury. But they didn't. They stood still. And by doing so, they did something far rarer than loyalty. They disobeyed a global system that expected them to be bought. What made this plot more terrifying than bombs or coups wasn't just its proximity, it was its elegance. No military, no chaos, no media headlines, just a clean hit, followed by a quiet funeral and a replacement government more cooperative with international demands. A reset disguised as a tragedy. But the plan failed. And the failure revealed a disturbing evolution. Traoré's enemies no longer needed to plan big operations. They had realized the truth. They only needed one man in the right place to say yes. The fact that he didn't, that none of them did, was not just an act of discipline. It was a declaration. Even in a world where everything has a price, some things remain priceless. Yet in the silence that followed, one haunting realization lingered. If 5 million wasn't enough to buy betrayal, how much more would they offer next time? The man with the briefcase didn't succeed, but he didn't need to. Because by the time $5 million was offered in cold blood, the strategy had already evolved. Traoré's enemies weren't just improvising, they were adapting, learning, reshaping their methods. And if you stepped back far enough, a shape began to emerge, not of chaos, but of design. These were never random attempts, never isolated stabs in the dark. When each failed plot is pinned to a wall, its date, its method, its targets, a web begins to appear. And the lines connecting them don't lead to revenge or emotion. They lead to something far more calculated. Disruption through layered pressure. What stood out first was the timing. Every operation, every attempt, every betrayal unfolded at a critical juncture. Not during peace, not during administrative downtime, but at precise political moments. After a controversial policy, after a new alliance, after Traoré closed another door on foreign influence. These attempts weren't designed to simply eliminate a man. They were coordinated efforts to reverse momentum. Take a closer look. The football match plot? It wasn't just a random sports event. It happened days after Burkina Faso announced its intention to review all military agreements with France. The failed coup attempt came directly on the heels of a major announcement about revising mining laws and reallocating contracts to local entities. And the bribe, that came just after Traoré declared the creation of a new state-owned gold refinery, threatening to block multinationals from exporting raw wealth unchecked. Every plot mirrored an act of sovereignty. As if for every bold decision he made, a consequence was designed and executed by those watching from afar. But timing is just the first layer. The second is the method of attack. Each attempt relied on a different access point, one through physical destruction, one through institutional reversal, one through psychological compromise. There was no repetition. Each operation tested a new boundary, trying to find where the weak spot was. In security, in loyalty, in the Constitution, or in the man himself. This is the fingerprint of intelligence work, not militia movements or angry factions, but trained professionals who understand systems. People know that if you can't take down the walls from the outside, you exploit the door hinges from within. Then there's the third layer, the disinformation campaigns that shadowed each incident. After every failed attempt, rumors surged, claims that Traoré was unstable, that factions within the military were losing faith, and that the president had lost control. These narratives didn't originate from local journalists. Many were traced to foreign platforms and anonymous accounts seeded in Francophone information spaces. What this suggests is not just an intent to kill, but to delegitimize, to create confusion, and to fracture trust. The goal was never just to take a life. It was to dismantle an image. The idea was simple. Even if you don't succeed in killing the body, you can still erode the soul of the presidency by seeding suspicion, doubt, and fear. And it was working, to an extent. Inside the country, anxiety grew. Some officials began requesting reassignment. Meetings were rescheduled at the last minute. Even allies abroad started hesitating. Not because they didn't support Traoré's vision, but because they feared he might not survive to see it through. That was the quiet genius of the campaign. It didn't rely solely on physical violence. It used the threat of instability as a tool. It made governance feel dangerous. It made support feel risky. And over time, that pressure began to weigh not just on the president, but on the entire system trying to hold the country together. But even as the pressure mounted, a pattern also emerged within Traoré's response. He didn't tighten the reins with paranoia. He didn't launch witch hunts or purge his inner circle. Instead, he leaned into transparency and decentralization. He brought regional leaders closer to national conversations. He made security reforms public. He spoke openly about the plots against him, not as a victim, but as a warning. And perhaps that was the greatest disruption of all. The system expected fear. What it got instead was defiance. Because once you identify the pattern, once you see the cycles of violence and manipulation repeating, you begin to understand that this isn't just a reaction to Traoré's decisions. It's the blueprint used against any African leader who dares to choose sovereignty over submission. And if there's a pattern, there's a plan. And if there's a plan, then somewhere, someone is paying for it. The question is, who has that kind of money, that kind of access, and that much to lose? Who do you think can be behind all this? Is it a single force? Let us know in the comment section. For how long do you think Traoré can stay protected? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.